Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The microwave beeped for the third time before I finally dragged myself off the couch to grab my sad excuse for dinner. Leftover Chinese takeout from 2 nights ago, sweet and sour chicken that had lost both its sweetness and its sourness, leaving behind something that tasted like regret with a side of MSG. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Kelsey's name lit up the screen. Can't make dinner tonight. Need some me time to focus on myself. Hope you understand. XOXO. I stared at the message, fork halfway to my mouth. 22 years of marriage, and my wife was canceling our Friday night tradition via text message. Not even a phone call. Just a casual dismissal with kissy faces attached like digital band-aids. Sure thing, sweetheart, I muttered to the empty kitchen, typing back a simple, all right, because what else was there to say? The house felt different without her energy filling it. Kelsey had this way of making every room feel alive, even when she was just scrolling through her phone or complaining about her latest PR campaign disaster. Now the silence pressed against my eardrums like I was underwater. I'm Mitch Donnelly, by the way. 43 years old, owner of a small but successful construction company called Donnelly & Sons, though we never had any sons, just dreams that got buried under Kelsey's career ambitions and my own stubborn pride. I've got calloused hands, a beer gut that's more suggestion than statement, and the kind of face that blends into crowds. The type of guy people underestimate until they need something built or fixed. My phone buzzed again. Ring doorbell notification. That was weird. Kelsey had her keys and we weren't expecting anyone. I pulled up the app, squinting at the small screen as the video loaded. My blood turned to ice water. There, standing on our front porch at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, was Brandon Mercer. Brand to his friends, which apparently now included my wife. He held a bottle of wine, expensive stuff. Judging by the fancy label, I could barely make out through the grainy camera feed. His BMW sat in our driveway like it belonged there. I watched him ring the doorbell, watched our front door open, watched my wife appear in a dress I'd never seen before, black, clingy, the kind that cost more than most people's rent. She smiled at him. Not the tired smile she'd been giving me for the past year, but the real thing. The smile that used to be mine. They hugged. She took the wine. He followed her inside. My fork clattered to the floor. Brandon Mercer was Kelsey's college boyfriend, the trust fund brat who'd dumped her senior year for some blonde sorority princess. He'd reappeared in our lives about 6 months ago when his family's investment firm hired Kelsey's PR company to handle some scandal involving offshore accounts and tax evasion. Kelsey had mentioned running into him a few times, always casual, always innocent. Just business, Mitch. You know how it is. Apparently, I didn't know how it was at all. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, staring at my phone, waiting for another notification, waiting for Brand to leave, waiting for some reasonable explanation that would make this all make sense. The notification finally came at 1:23 a.m. Bran walked out our front door, adjusting his jacket, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Kelsey appeared behind him in a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. They kissed. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a real kiss. The kind married people stop giving each other after the first decade. He drove away in his BMW. She closed the door. I was still sitting in the kitchen when she came home at 2:15 a.m., claiming she'd been at Lara's place having girl talk about work stress. She smelled like expensive wine and unfamiliar cologne. Her lipstick was gone, and her hair had that just fucked messiness that she used to have after our better nights together. "How was your evening?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Quiet," I said. Real quiet. She kissed my forehead, a consolation prize kiss, and headed upstairs. I heard the shower running for a long time. That's when I knew. That's when the game changed completely. I've been played, I thought, staring at the Ring app footage on my phone. But the game's not over, not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my garage workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, planning my next move like I was preparing for a military operation. Old habits from my army days. When you're outgunned and outnumbered, you don't charge in guns blazing. You gather intelligence. You plan. You strike when your enemy least expects it. The first thing I did was check our security system. Kelsey thought I was paranoid for installing cameras around the house, but my construction sites had been hit by thieves twice in the past year. Better safe than sorry, I'd told her. Now I was grateful for my own paranoia. I pulled up the footage from our interior cameras, the ones Kelsey had forgotten about because they were hidden in smoke detectors and picture frames. What I saw made my stomach twist into knots that would make a sailor proud. There was my wife, leading another man through our living room at 9:52 p.m. Bran's hands were already on her waist. By 10:15, they were on our couch, the couch where Kelsey and I watched Netflix every Sunday night, and his hands were places that used to be exclusively mine. I fast-forwarded through the worst parts. I'm not a masochist, and I didn't need to torture myself with every detail. But I needed evidence. I needed proof of what was happening in my own home, while I sat in the kitchen eating cold Chinese food like a chump. The timestamp showed they moved upstairs at 10:43 p.m. My bedroom camera had mysteriously malfunctioned 3 weeks ago. Kelsey said she'd accidentally knocked it over while dusting. I'd been meaning to fix it, but never got around to it. Convenient timing, in retrospect. They came back downstairs at 12:47 a.m. Kelsey was in that silk robe. Bran was buttoning his shirt. They sat on the couch talking for another 30 minutes, sharing the wine he'd brought. Intimate conversation, lots of touching, the kind of comfortable intimacy that doesn't happen overnight. This had been going on for a while. I copied all the footage to 3 separate flash drives and uploaded it to a cloud storage account Kelsey didn't know about. Then I started digging deeper. Our phone bill showed dozens of calls between Kelsey and a number I didn't recognize. When I reverse searched it, bingo, Brandon Mercer's cell phone. The calls had started 4 months ago, short at first, then longer, much longer. Hour-long conversations that happened when I was at work sites or grabbing beers with my crew. Credit card statements revealed charges I'd never questioned before. Expensive lunches at downtown hotels, purchases from Victoria's Secret, lingerie I'd never seen her wear. A weekend spa trip to the mountains that she'd claimed was a work retreat. I felt like an idiot, a blind, trusting idiot who'd been played by experts while I worried about lumber costs and building permits. My phone rang at 6 a.m. Pete Kowalski, my foreman, and the closest thing I had to a best friend. "You sound like shit," Pete said without preamble. "What's wrong?" Pete was one of those guys who could read people like blueprints. Straightforward, no bullshit, loyal to a fault. We'd worked together for 8 years and he'd never steered me wrong. "Kelsey's cheating on me," I said. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. Real in a way they hadn't been when they were just thoughts bouncing around my skull. Silence on the other end. Then, "You sure?" "Video evidence, sure." "Shit. With who?" "Her college ex. Rich boy named Brandon Mercer." "The trust fund asshole?" "Jesus, Mitch. What are you gonna do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I gonna do? The old me, the pre-evidence me, might have confronted Kelsey directly, demanded explanations, tried to work things out, suggested marriage counseling like some pathetic sitcom husband. But the new me, the me who'd spent the night watching my wife betray 22 years of marriage in high definition, had different ideas. "I'm going to give her exactly what she wants," I said. "Which is?" "Space. Lots and lots of space." Pete chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "You need help with anything?" "Maybe. I'll let you know." After hanging up, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten dinner alone the night before. Kelsey came downstairs at 7:30, already dressed for work in a sharp business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. "Morning," she said, not quite looking at me. Guilt had a way of making people avoid eye contact. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Like a baby." She poured coffee into her travel mug, added cream and sugar with practiced efficiency. "Listen, about last night." "Don't worry about it," I said. "Everyone needs their space sometimes." She looked surprised, maybe even a little disappointed. Had she wanted me to fight for her? To demand explanations? "Sorry to let you down, sweetheart." "I might need some more space in the coming weeks," she said carefully. "Work's been crazy, and I need to focus on this new client. You understand, right?" "Absolutely. Take all the space you need." She kissed my cheek and left for work. I watched through the kitchen window as she backed her Mercedes out of the driveway, probably already thinking about her next rendezvous with Bran. That's when I started making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Jim Morrison, not the dead rock star, but a sharp divorce attorney who'd helped me with business contracts over the years. I explained the situation and sent him the evidence. "This is pretty damning stuff," Jim said after reviewing the files. "Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect asset division and alimony. How do you want to play this?" "Quietly, for now. I want to know exactly where I stand before I make any moves." "Smart. I'll start preparing paperwork, but we'll hold off on filing until you give the word." The second call was to my accountant. I wanted to know exactly what Kelsey and I owned, both jointly and separately. Knowledge is power, and I was building an arsenal. The third call was to Mrs. Hennessy, our 78-year-old neighbor who knew everything that happened within a 3-block radius of our house. She was the neighborhood's unofficial intelligence network, and I had a feeling she'd seen more than she'd let on. "Oh, Mitch, dear," she said when I knocked on her door. Come in. I was just making tea." Mrs. Hennessy's house was like a museum of suburban life. Doilies on every surface, family photos covering the walls, and the smell of lavender and old books. She led me to her kitchen, where she had a perfect view of our driveway. "I suppose you want to talk about your wife's gentleman caller," she said without preamble. I nearly choked on my tea. "You saw him?" "Dear boy, I see everything. That fancy car has been showing up for months, always when you're at work. I did wonder when you'd notice." "Why didn't you say anything?" She patted my hand with fingers that felt like paper. "Not my place to interfere in young people's marriages. But since you're asking..." She walked to her kitchen drawer and pulled out a small notebook. "I keep track of things. Helps me remember." The notebook contained dates, times, and license plate numbers. A detailed log of every time Bran had visited our house over the past 4 months. Mrs. Hennessy was better than a private investigator. "Thank you," I said. "This helps more than you know." "That wife of yours thinks she's so clever," Mrs. Hennessy said with a sniff. "But she's not as smart as she thinks. Neither is that boy with his fancy car." I was starting to think she was right. That afternoon, I drove to the Green Lion, the Irish pub where my crew and I grabbed beers after particularly brutal workdays. Tommy Flanagan, the bartender and owner, had been serving drinks in this neighborhood for 20 years. If Mrs. Hennessy was the eyes and ears of our suburb, Tommy was its mouth, the place where gossip got refined and redistributed. "Mitch," Tommy called out as I walked in. "Little early for you, isn't it?" "Rough day," I said, settling onto a bar stool. "Jameson neat." Tommy poured the whiskey and studied my face. "Woman troubles?" "That obvious?" "It's always woman troubles or money troubles. You don't look broke, so..." He shrugged. I told Tommy about Kelsey and Bran, keeping it vague, but clear enough that he'd understand the situation. Tommy nodded along, occasionally refilling my glass. "You know," Tommy said when I finished, "that fancy boy's been in here a few times recently. Always on his phone, talking loud about some married woman he's seeing. Real proud of himself, if you know what I mean. My jaw tightened. He talked about Kelsey? Never mentioned names, but he described her pretty accurately. Said she was married to some blue-collar loser who didn't appreciate what he had. Blue-collar loser. That stung more than I wanted to admit. What else did he say? Bragged about how easy it was to steal her away. Said married women were the best because they were grateful for attention. Tommy's expression darkened. Real piece of work, that one. I finished my drink and left Tommy a generous tip. Thanks for the information. Anytime, Mitch. And hey, if you need anything, you know where to find me. Driving home, I felt the pieces of my plan starting to come together. Kelsey and Bran thought they were playing some sophisticated game of adultery, but they were amateurs. They'd gotten sloppy, overconfident. They'd underestimated the blue-collar loser. That was going to be their biggest mistake. Saturday morning, Kelsey announced she was going shopping with Lara, her best friend and partner in crime. Lara was one of those women who treated other people's marriages like entertainment, always stirring up drama and encouraging bad decisions. If Kelsey was cheating, Lara definitely knew about it. "Don't wait up," Kelsey said, grabbing her purse and keys. "We might catch a movie after." "Have fun," I said, not looking up from my newspaper. She seemed surprised by my lack of interest. The old Mitch would have asked what movie, what time she'd be home, maybe suggested we do something together instead. The new Mitch had other priorities. After she left, I called Pete. "You free today? I need help with a project." "Sure thing, boss. What kind of project?" "The kind that requires your particular talents." Pete had spent 10 years in the Marines before joining my crew. He was good with locks, better with security systems, and best at not asking too many questions when the situation called for discretion. He showed up an hour later with a toolbox and a grin that meant trouble. "So, what are we doing?" he asked. "Taking inventory," I said, "and making some adjustments." We started with Kelsey's car. She'd left it in the garage, taking her Mercedes instead of her BMW convertible, the one I'd bought her for her 40th birthday. I'd always thought it was too flashy for our neighborhood, but she'd loved it. Said it made her feel young and successful. Pete picked the lock on the glove compartment while I searched the rest of the car. What we found was better than I'd hoped for. Love notes from Bran tucked under the floor mats, hotel receipts in the center console, a spare key to what I assumed was Bran's apartment hidden in a magnetic box under the driver's seat. "Jesus, Mitch," Pete said, reading one of the notes. "This guy writes like a horny teenager." The note was full of purple prose about Kelsey's beauty and how much Bran missed her sweet kisses. It was signed, "Forever Yours B," with a little heart dotting the I. I wanted to throw up. "Copy everything," I said. "Photos, documents, whatever you can find." While Pete worked, I went through Kelsey's home office. Her computer was password protected, but I knew her well enough to guess the password on the third try. Success 2024, her mantra for this year. Her email was a goldmine, hundreds of messages between her and Bran, going back 4 months. The early ones were flirty but innocent, discussing work and reminiscing about college. But they quickly escalated into explicit territory that made my stomach turn. In one email, Kelsey wrote, "Mitch has been so distant lately. I don't think he even notices me anymore. Being with you makes me feel alive again." In another, "I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. When can we be together again?" Bran's responses were equally damning, but with an arrogant edge that made my blood boil. "Your husband doesn't deserve you. You're wasted on someone who can't appreciate your sophistication." There it was again. The implication that I was somehow beneath them, too stupid or unsophisticated to keep my wife happy. They saw me as an obstacle to remove, not a person whose life they were destroying. I forwarded the most incriminating emails to my secure account, then deleted the sent items so Kelsey wouldn't know I'd accessed her computer. Pete finished with the car and joined me in the office. Find anything good? Enough to bury them both, I said. What about you? He held up a small device that looked like a USB drive. GPS tracker. Military grade. Completely undetectable. We can monitor everywhere she goes. Is that legal? Pete shrugged. It's her car, registered in your name. Technically, you're just keeping track of your own property. We installed the tracker and synced it to an app on my phone. Within minutes, I could see Kelsey's exact location, currently at an upscale shopping center downtown, just like she'd said. At least she wasn't lying about everything. But the day was young. My phone buzzed with a text from Kelsey. Running late, dinner with Laura, home by 10. I checked the GPS. Her car was parked outside the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where she and Bran had been meeting, according to the receipts we'd found. She's at the hotel, I told Pete. Want to go have a look? I was tempted, but confronting them in public would only give them the upper hand. Better to let them think they were still getting away with it. No, let's go work on Phase 2. Phase 2 involved Bran's apartment. I'd looked up his address using the key we'd found, a luxury high-rise in the financial district, the kind of place where parking spots cost more than most people's cars. We drove downtown in Pete's pickup truck, which was anonymous enough to blend in with the construction and delivery vehicles in the area. The building had security, but Pete had dealt with worse during his military days. Service entrance, he said, pointing to a loading dock around back. Delivery guys prop these doors open all the time to move furniture and appliances. Sure enough, the service door was wedged open with a rubber doorstop. We walked in like we belonged there, Pete carrying a toolbox and me holding a clipboard. Amazing how invisible you become when you look like you're supposed to be somewhere. Bran's apartment was on the 15th floor. The hallway was empty. Most rich people were out spending money on Saturday afternoons. Pete had the door open in under 30 seconds. Remind me never to piss you off, I said. Smart policy. Bran's apartment was exactly what I'd expected, all glass and chrome, with expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable and art that probably cost more than my truck. Everything was perfectly arranged, like a magazine spread designed to impress visitors. We weren't there to steal anything. We were there to send a message. Pete worked on the kitchen while I handled the bedroom. We didn't break anything or cause obvious damage. Instead, we made subtle changes that would drive Bran crazy trying to figure out what was wrong. I moved his furniture exactly 3 inches to the left, rearranged his closet so everything was slightly out of place, changed his alarm clock to go off at 3 a.m. every day, loosened the screws on his toilet seat just enough that it would shift when he sat down. Pete was more creative. He put a small piece of tape over the laser on Bran's TV remote, rendering it useless, switched the salt and sugar in identical containers, programmed his coffee maker to brew at maximum strength, strong enough to strip paint. Psychological warfare, Pete explained. He'll know something's wrong, but he won't be able to prove it. Drives people nuts. The pièce de résistance was in Bran's bathroom. I found a bottle of expensive cologne, the same scent I'd smelled on Kelsey the night before. I carefully removed the cap and added a few drops of liquid from a small vial Pete had brought. What's that? I asked. Skunk essence. Hunters use it to cover their scent. A tiny amount won't be noticeable at first, but it gets stronger over time, and it doesn't wash off easily. We were in and out of the apartment in 20 minutes, leaving no trace of our visit except for the subtle changes that would slowly drive Bran insane. On the drive home, my phone chimed with another GPS alert. Kelsey's car was moving again, heading toward our neighborhood. I checked the time, 6:30 p.m. She'd be home soon, probably with stories about her wonderful day with Laura. Phase 2 complete, Pete said. What's next? Now we wait, I said, and we watch them squirm. But I was already planning Phase 3. Kelsey and Bran thought they were playing chess while I played checkers. Time to show them the difference between a game and a war. Sunday morning brought the first signs that my plan was working. Kelsey's phone rang at 7 a.m., Bran probably calling to complain about his mysteriously malfunctioning apartment, I pretended to be asleep while she took the call in the bathroom. "That's so weird," I heard her say. "Are you sure you didn't change anything? Maybe you're just stressed from work." When she came back to bed, I rolled over and mumbled, "Everything okay?" "Bran's having some issues with his apartment. Thinks someone broke in, but nothing's missing." She was trying to sound casual, but I caught the worry in her voice. "Probably just paranoid," I said. "Rich people always think someone's out to get them." She gave me a sharp look. "That's not very nice, Mitch." "Just an observation." The rest of Sunday passed quietly. Kelsey seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and making hushed phone calls. I worked in the garage, organizing tools and planning my next moves while keeping one ear on her conversations. Around noon, Lara showed up unannounced. She was one of those women who dressed like she was still 25, despite being well into her 40s. Too much makeup, too tight jeans, and an attitude that suggested the world owed her something. "Hey, Mitch," she said when she found me in the garage. "Working hard as always, I see." "Someone has to pay the bills," I replied without looking up from my workbench. Lara had never liked me. She thought Kelsey had married beneath herself, settling for a blue-collar guy when she could have had someone with more money and status. The feeling was mutual. I thought Lara was a bad influence who encouraged Kelsey's worst impulses. "Kelsey's inside," I said when Lara continued standing there. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you first." That got my attention. Lara had never wanted to talk to me about anything. "About what?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "About giving Kelsey some space. She's going through a difficult time right now, trying to figure out what she wants from life. The best thing you can do is be supportive and not ask too many questions." I set down my wrench and turned to face her. "What kind of questions shouldn't I ask?" "You know what I mean. About where she goes, who she sees, what she does with her free time. She needs room to breathe." So Lara was definitely in on it, probably helping coordinate meetings, providing alibis, maybe even covering for Kelsey when she was with Bran. I felt a surge of anger, but kept my voice level. "I appreciate the advice," I said, "but I think I can handle my own marriage." "Can you?" Lara's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been taking Kelsey for granted for years. She's a sophisticated, intelligent woman with needs you don't seem capable of meeting." There it was. The same condescending attitude I'd been reading in Bran's emails. They all saw me as some knuckle-dragging caveman who was lucky to have landed a woman like Kelsey. "You might be right," I said. "Maybe I should pay more attention to what my wife needs." Lara smiled, thinking she'd won. "I'm glad you understand." After she went inside, I called Tommy at the Green Lion. "I need a favor," I said. "You know that guy I told you about yesterday? Bran Mercer? The trust fund boy? What about him? Next time he comes in, I want you to call me, and maybe buy him a few drinks on the house. Get him talking." "You want me to get him drunk and pump him for information?" "I want you to be a friendly bartender who's interested in his stories. What he does with that friendliness is up to him." Tommy chuckled. "I can work with that. Anything specific you want to know?" "Everything. His plans, his feelings about married women, what he thinks about blue-collar workers. Let him hang himself with his own words." "Consider it done." Monday morning, Kelsey left for work earlier than usual, claiming she had an important client meeting. The GPS tracker showed her heading toward downtown, but instead of going to her office, she stopped at the Marriott again. I called Pete. "She's at the hotel. Want to take a ride?" "On my way." We parked across the street from the hotel and waited. At 9:15 a.m., Bran's BMW pulled into the valet parking area. Even from a distance, I could see him gesturing angrily at the valet, probably complaining about the skunk smell that had been building in his cologne for the past 2 days. "He looks pissed," Pete observed. "Good. That's the point." Bran disappeared into the hotel. An hour later, he and Kelsey emerged together, walking close but not touching. maintaining the pretense of a business relationship in case anyone was watching. They got into separate cars and drove away. My phone buzzed with a text from Kelsey. "Client meeting running long. Might be late tonight." I texted back, "No problem. Take your time." That afternoon, I got a call from Jim Morrison, my lawyer. "I've been looking into Brandon Mercer's background," Jim said. "Interesting guy. Trust fund baby, like you said, but there's more to it. His family's been cutting his allowance over the past year because of some bad investments and gambling debts." "How bad?" "Bad enough that he's been borrowing money from some unsavory people. The kind who charge high interest and break kneecaps when you can't pay." This was better than I'd hoped. Bran wasn't just a rich boy slumming it with a married woman. He was a desperate rich boy who needed money. That changed the dynamic considerably. "There's something else," Jim continued. "I did some digging into your wife's finances. She's been moving money around, opening new accounts you might not know about." My stomach dropped. "How much money?" "Hard to say without seeing the full picture, but it looks like she's been siphoning funds from your joint accounts for months. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Could be she's planning to leave you and wants to make sure she has resources. Or she was funding her affair with Bran. Either way, it was theft. What are my options? Legally? Not much until we file for divorce. But you might want to protect your assets before she can move any more money." I spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with my bank, moving money from joint accounts to individual ones and putting alerts on all our credit cards. If Kelsey was planning to clean me out, she was going to be disappointed. That evening, she came home at 9 p.m. with shopping bags from expensive stores downtown. "Successful day?" I asked. "Very. The client loved our proposal." She showed me a new dress, black, elegant, the kind of thing she'd wear to impress someone special. I thought I'd treat myself. It's beautiful. Special occasion. Just felt like looking nice for my husband. She kissed my cheek, and I smelled Bran's cologne, or what was left of it after Pete's modifications. "You always look nice," I said. She seemed surprised by the compliment. When was the last time I'd told her she looked nice? When was the last time she'd dressed up for me instead of another man? For a moment I felt a flicker of the old feelings. This was Kelsey, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved for over 2 decades. Maybe we could work this out. Maybe there was still something worth saving. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from the GPS tracker. While Kelsey was supposedly in client meetings, her car had made 3 stops: the hotel, an expensive jewelry store, and a lingerie boutique. The moment of weakness passed. This wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. This was about justice. That night, after Kelsey fell asleep, I sat in my home office planning the next phase of my campaign. I'd been reactive so far, responding to their moves. Time to go on the offensive. I opened my laptop and started typing. If Bran wanted to play games with a blue-collar loser, I was going to show him what this particular loser was capable of. The gloves were coming off. Tuesday brought the call I'd been waiting for. Tommy's voice was excited when he rang at 2 p.m. "Your boy's here," he said, 3 sheets to the wind and running his mouth like a broken faucet. "You better get down here." I told Pete I had to run an errand and drove to the Green Lion. The afternoon crowd was light, a few retirees nursing beers and watching sports highlights on the TV above the bar. Bran sat alone at the far end, gesturing wildly as he talked to Tommy. I took a seat 3 stools down, close enough to hear but far enough to stay invisible. Bran was drunker than I'd expected, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfectly styled hair messed up. The skunk smell from his cologne was faint but noticeable. He'd probably been trying different scents to cover it up. "And then the alarm goes off at 3 in the morning again," Bran was saying. "4th time this week. I've checked everything, called the building manager, even had a tech guy look at it. Nothing's wrong, but it keeps happening." "That's weird," Tommy said, polishing a glass. "Maybe you got a ghost." "Don't even joke about that." Bran drained his whiskey and signaled for another. And it's not just the alarm. Everything in my apartment feels off, like someone's been moving things around. But nothing's missing, and security says nobody's been in my unit. Sounds stressful. You have no idea. Work's been hell. My family's breathing down my neck about money, and now I can't even relax in my own home. Bran leaned closer to Tommy, lowering his voice. The only good thing in my life right now is this woman I'm seeing. Yeah? Tell me about her. She's incredible. Beautiful, sophisticated, way too good for the loser she married. We went to college together, but she settled for some blue-collar nobody who builds houses for a living. Can you believe that? My hands tightened around my beer bottle, but I kept my expression neutral. Married, huh? Tommy said. That's complicated. Not for much longer. She's getting tired of being taken for granted. Her husband doesn't appreciate what he has, treats her like a piece of furniture instead of the amazing woman she is. She deserves so much better. Like you? Exactly like me. We're from the same world, you know. We understand each other in ways her husband never could. He's probably never even been to a wine tasting or an art gallery. What kind of life is that for a woman like Kelsey? There it was, my wife's name, spoken with casual ownership by a man who'd been screwing her in our bed. I wanted to grab Bran by his silk tie and drag him into the alley, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, what's your plan? Tommy asked. She's going to leave him soon. We've been talking about it for weeks. She just needs to work up the courage to walk away from all those wasted years. Bran's voice took on a dreamy quality. We could be so good together. Travel, fine dining, cultural events, all the things she's been missing. Sounds expensive. Bran's expression darkened. Money's not a problem. Well, it's a temporary problem, but I'm working on it. My family thinks I'm irresponsible, but they don't understand that sometimes you have to take risks to get what you want. What kind of risks? Let's just say I've made some investments that haven't paid off yet, but they will. And in the meantime, Kelsey's been helping out with expenses. She has access to joint accounts with her husband, money he'll never miss because he's too stupid to pay attention to his own finances. My vision went red. Not only was Bran sleeping with my wife, but he was using her to steal my money. And Kelsey was letting him do it. I stood up, leaving cash on the bar, and walked toward the exit. But as I passed Bran's stool, I accidentally bumped into him hard enough to make him spill his drink. Hey! Bran spun around, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. Watch where you're going! I turned to face him, letting him see my face clearly for the first time. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by fear. Sorry about that, I said calmly. Didn't see you there. Bran's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He knew he'd been caught, knew I'd heard everything he'd just said. The alcohol in his system made him stupid enough to keep talking. You're Kelsey's husband. That's right. Mitch Donnelly, the blue-collar loser. I extended my hand. Nice to finally meet you properly, Bran. He didn't take my hand. Smart move, considering what I wanted to do with it. This isn't what it looks like, he said. Really? Because it looks like you've been screwing my wife and stealing my money while bragging about it to strangers in bars. But please tell me what it actually is. The bar had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, sensing the tension. Tommy had moved closer, probably ready to break up a fight if necessary. Bran tried to stand up straighter, but the alcohol made him sway. Kelsey's not happy with you. She hasn't been for a long time. We're friends. Friends who meet at hotels and steal money from joint bank accounts? His face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You just told everyone in here about it. About how stupid I am, how I don't deserve her, how she's been helping with expenses using money from our joint accounts. I stepped closer. That's theft, Bran. Felony theft. You can't prove anything. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo. one of the hotel receipts we'd found in Kelsey's car. Want to bet? Bran's bravado crumbled. He looked around the bar, realizing that his drunken confession had been witnessed by a dozen people who were now staring at him with disgust. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Maybe we can work something out, man to man. I'm listening. I'll break it off with Kelsey. Clean break, no contact, and I'll pay back whatever money she took. We can keep this between us, no lawyers or police involved. It was tempting. The easy solution, the path of least resistance. Take the money and let them both disappear from my life forever. But it wasn't enough. Not after everything they'd put me through. Here's my counteroffer, I said. You stay away from my wife, you pay back every penny you stole, and you pray I don't decide to press charges anyway. Because if I see you near Kelsey again, if I find out you've contacted her in any way, I'll make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. You're threatening me? I'm promising you. Bran looked like he wanted to say something else, but Tommy cleared his throat loudly. Gentlemen, Tommy said, maybe it's time to take this conversation outside. No need, I said. Mr. Mercer was just leaving. Weren't you, Bran? Bran threw some money on the bar and stumbled toward the exit. At the door, he turned back. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. After he left, the bar slowly returned to normal. Tommy poured me a fresh beer and slid it across the bar. That was interesting, he said. Thanks for the call. Any time. For what it's worth, I think you handled that pretty well. Could have gone a lot worse. He was right. The old me might have thrown the first punch, which would have made me the bad guy. The new me was learning to fight smarter, not harder. I finished my beer and headed home, knowing that Bran would probably call Kelsey immediately to tell her what had happened. The secret was out now. No more pretending, no more games. Time for the final act. I was waiting in the living room when Kelsey came home at 6:30, earlier than she'd been arriving lately. Her face was pale, her usual composure cracked around the edges. We need to talk, she said. I figured we might. She sat on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining distance like I was something dangerous. Maybe I was. Bran called me, she said. He told me about what happened at the bar. I'm sure he did. What's his version? He said you threatened him, made a scene in front of everyone. Did he mention the part where he bragged about sleeping with my wife and stealing my money? Kelsey flinched. It's not that simple, Mitch. Isn't it? Because it seems pretty simple to me. You've been having an affair for months, using our joint accounts to fund it, and planning to leave me for a trust fund brat who's up to his eyeballs in gambling debts. How did you... She stopped herself, but it was too late. How did I know about his debts? I did my homework, Kelsey. Something you might have considered before hooking up with a guy who's borrowing money from loan sharks. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I never meant for it to happen, she said. When Bran came back into my life, it was just business at first. But then we started talking, remembering the old days, and I realized how unhappy I'd become. So you decided to cheat on me instead of talking about it. I tried to talk to you, but you were always working, always busy with the business or your crew. When was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about bills or schedules? She had a point, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. So this is my fault? It's both our faults. We grew apart, Mitch. We became strangers living in the same house. Bran made me feel alive again, made me remember who I used to be before I became just another suburban housewife. And the money? Was that part of remembering who you used to be? Kelsey's face reddened. Bran was going through a rough patch. I wanted to help. With my money, without asking me. It was our money, and it wasn't that much. $15,000, Kelsey. I checked. Her mouth fell open. She hadn't realized I'd been tracking the withdrawals and transfers. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting myself. Good thing, too. Or you might have cleaned out our accounts before running off with your boyfriend. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and Bran were planning to steal my money and disappear together. The only thing that went wrong was getting caught. Kelsey stood up, pacing to the window. You don't understand. Bran's not just some con man. He's sophisticated, cultured, successful. He's broke, Kelsey. His family cut him off because he gambled away his trust fund. The only reason he's interested in you is because you have access to money he needs to pay off his debts. That's not true. I pulled out my phone and showed her the financial report Jim had compiled. His credit cards are maxed out. He owes money to 3 different casinos. He's 2 months behind on his rent. Face it, sweetheart. You're not his great love. You're his meal ticket. She read the report, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she sank back onto the couch. I don't believe this, she whispered. Believe it. Your sophisticated boyfriend has been using you from day one. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street, normal suburban sounds from a normal suburban evening. Nothing about this felt normal. What happens now? Kelsey finally asked. That depends on you. What do you mean? I mean you have a choice to make. We can try to work this out, marriage counseling, rebuilding trust, all that stuff, or we can end this cleanly and go our separate ways. And if I choose to work things out, then you cut all contact with Bran immediately. You pay back every penny you took from our accounts, and you earn back my trust one day at a time. And if I choose to leave, then I file for divorce tomorrow, using all the evidence I've collected over the past week. Adultery, theft, fraud, it'll be ugly, but it'll be fast. Kelsey was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. You really have been watching me, she said. I had to. You gave me no choice. The cameras in the house? Among other things. The bourbon went down hard, burning its way to the place in my chest that still felt hollow. I sat there in the quiet, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall suddenly louder than it had ever been before. I didn't know how long I stayed like that. 10 minutes, an hour, maybe more. Time didn't feel real anymore. It was like my whole life had been running on a clock I didn't wind. Eventually, I stood up, walked to the sink, and dumped the rest of the bourbon down the drain. I needed my head clear. Because even though Kelsey was gone, the mess she left behind wasn't. There were still questions that needed answers, and debts that needed settling. The first call I made wasn't to Jim Morrison or Pete or anyone who might have told me to let it go. It was to the bank. I asked to speak with the branch manager, the same man who'd congratulated Kelsey and me on our 20th anniversary when we refinanced the house. I told him I needed copies of every withdrawal, every transfer, every cashier's check from the past 6 months. I wanted the paper trail. He said it might take a day or two. I told him I'd wait. After that, I went into the garage. The smell of oil and steel was grounding, familiar. I sat on the old stool by the workbench and stared at my hands. Hands that had fixed 100 engines, built half of what we owned, held Kelsey's face while she cried after her father's funeral. Now those same hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was anger or exhaustion. Maybe both. Pete called later that night. You good? He asked, his voice low, cautious. Define good, I said. I heard she's staying with her sister. Small town, big mouths. People are already talking. Let them, I said. I'm done keeping her secrets. You gonna do something about Bran? Not tonight, but soon. There was a pause. Just don't do anything stupid, boss. Too late for that, I said, and hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation Kelsey and I had ever had in my head, searching for the moment when she started lying. Maybe it had been years. Maybe it had been from the beginning. The realization hit me like a slow, heavy wave. Every laugh, every I love you. Every shared moment suddenly tainted by the knowledge that part of her had always been somewhere else. At dawn, I got dressed and drove. No destination. Just driving to keep from thinking too much. The roads were empty, the world still waking up. I ended up by the lake, the same place Kelsey and I had gone for our first anniversary picnic. I parked the car and walked down to the dock, the boards creaking under my boots. The water was still, gray, mirroring the sky. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Not because anything was fixed, but because I'd finally stopped lying to myself. She hadn't just betrayed me. I'd betrayed myself by ignoring the signs, by pretending that love could survive on denial. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "Mitch," a man's voice said. "It's Frank, Brand's landlord." "Yeah? Just thought you should know he's in trouble. The loan sharks came by again last night. Cops got called. He's in the hospital now, broken ribs, busted jaw." "Why are you telling me this?" "He had your number written on a piece of paper. Said if anything happened, I should call you." I hung up without saying a word. For a long time, I just stood there by the lake, watching the ripples spread across the surface. Then I got back in the truck and started driving toward the hospital. When I got there, I found Bran in a private room, half conscious, hooked up to monitors. His face looked worse than before, bruised, swollen, stitched. He opened one eye when he saw me. "Didn't expect you," he muttered. "I didn't expect to come," I said. He gave a faint, bitter smile. "Guess we're both full of surprises." I stood there for a while, not saying anything. The room smelled like antiseptic and regret. "Why didn't you call the cops before it got this bad?" I finally asked. "I thought I could fix it. Thought I could pay them back before anyone found out." He winced as he spoke. "Guess I was wrong." "You were wrong about a lot of things." He didn't argue. He just nodded. "You came to finish what they started?" "No," I said. "I came to make sure you understand something. You wrecked your life chasing something that wasn't yours. And she's not coming to save you. Not now, not ever." He swallowed hard. "I know." "You're lucky," I said, "because some people don't get a chance to rebuild." He closed his eyes. "What happens now?" "You disappear," I said. "Start over. And if you ever try to contact her again, I'll make sure the sharks aren't your biggest problem." He nodded slowly. "Fair." I turned to leave, but he called out weakly. "Mitch?" "Yeah?" "I really am sorry. Sorry doesn't change what you did, but maybe it changes what you do next." When I got home, the sun was setting. The house looked different now, emptier, but somehow clearer. Like all the noise had finally drained out, leaving only what mattered. I sat on the porch steps and watched the streetlights flicker on. Neighbors walked their dogs, kids rode their bikes, life went on. It always does. I thought about Kelsey, where she was, who she was with, what story she was telling herself to make it all seem justified. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. Not in the bitter, angry way I had before, but in the peaceful, detached way of someone who's finally free. Later, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a message to her, not a report for the lawyer, just words, thoughts, fragments of who I used to be and who I might still become. I wrote until my hands hurt, until the bourbon stopped whispering from the kitchen, until the past felt like something I could finally put down. When I finished, I printed the pages and tucked them into a drawer, not as evidence, as a record. Proof that I'd survived. Before going to bed, I walked through the house one last time. Her perfume was fading now, replaced by the faint scent of motor oil and coffee. My world again. Mine. I paused at the front door, looked out at the quiet street, and smiled to myself. It wasn't triumph or revenge or even justice. It was something simpler. It was peace, the kind that only comes after the storm. He gave a hollow laugh that sounded more like a sob. Yeah, A happy marriage, stability, security, a life that made sense. He turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was no arrogance in his posture, no charm to hide behind. You think I don't know what I am? I'm a 40-year-old trust fund baby who's never worked a real day in his life. You built something with your hands, created a business, made a life for yourself. I've just been coasting on my family's money and charm. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. So what now? I asked. Now I disappear, leave the city, start over somewhere else. Try to become the kind of person who deserves a second chance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the spare key we'd found in Kelsey's car. You left this at my house, I said, placing it on his dresser. He looked at the key, then at me. I was never at your house. I know, but if anyone asks, that's where you left it. Understanding dawned in his good eye. I was giving him an alibi, a way to explain how I'd gotten into his apartment, if it ever came to that. Why would you do that? Because despite everything, I don't think you're a bad person, just a weak one, and weak people can get stronger if they work at it. Pete and I left Bran sitting in his destroyed apartment, probably wondering how his life had gone so wrong so fast. In the elevator, Pete shook his head. You're a better man than me, boss. I'd have left him to the sharks. Maybe, but I'm not trying to be better than anyone else. I'm just trying to be better than I was yesterday. We walked out into the bright afternoon sun, the kind of cold light that makes everything feel too sharp, too real. The city noise hit us like a wave, horns blaring, engines roaring, people rushing somewhere that wasn't here. For a second, I envied them. Their lives hadn't just fallen apart. Pete lit a cigarette and handed me one. I hadn't smoked in years, but I took it anyway. So, he said, exhaling, that's it then? You just let him go? He's already punished himself, I said. Guys like him, everything they are depends on the illusion that they're winning. Take that away, and you don't need to do anything else. Pete nodded, flicking ash onto the sidewalk. You think Kelsey knows what kind of mess he's in? If she doesn't now, she will soon. And when she comes crawling back, she won't, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. But if she does, she'll find the door locked. When I got home later that day, the house felt like an echo chamber. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a memory trying to speak. I sat on the couch, staring at the framed family photos on the mantel, the vacations, the birthdays, the smiles that had all been rehearsed. There was one picture of Kelsey from our early years, standing in front of our first house with paint on her cheek. We'd just finished repainting the porch, and she'd laughed when I told her she had a blue streak across her face. I remembered how real that laugh had felt back then. Somewhere along the line, we'd both stopped being those people. I picked up the photo, studied it for a long moment, then placed it face down on the table. That night, I poured myself a drink and stepped out onto the back porch. The air smelled like rain and leaves, the scent of endings. I could still picture her sitting out here during summer evenings, glass of wine in hand, scrolling through her phone, pretending she wasn't somewhere else in her mind. I took a slow sip and watched the sky turn darker, stars beginning to pierce through the clouds. For years, I'd believed marriage was about endurance, holding on no matter how rough things got. But now I realized it was also about honesty, and when honesty dies, everything else eventually does too. Kelsey had made her choices, Bran had made his, and I was left standing in the wreckage, deciding what kind of man I wanted to be after it all. The next morning, Pete stopped by with breakfast, 2 coffees and a paper bag of bacon and egg sandwiches. You look like hell, he said, handing me one. Thanks. You hear from her? No, I said, and I hope I don't. You think she'll take the divorce lying down? She might fight it at first. Then she'll realize she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Jim's handling everything. Pete leaned back in his chair. So what now, boss? You rebuild? I looked out the window at the garage across the street, the same one I'd started in 20 years ago, back when I thought hard work could fix anything. Yeah, I said quietly. I rebuild, not just the business. Me. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the papers I'd signed, the photographs I hadn't yet thrown away. It occurred to me that for the first time in decades, my life belonged only to me. No shared bank accounts, no shared lies, just clean, empty space. The kind of emptiness that isn't a punishment, but a chance. Later, I went back to the shop and rolled up the garage door. The sound of the metal rattling open felt like a beginning. I turned on the radio, grabbed a wrench, and got to work. The smell of grease and steel filled the air, steady and familiar. Machines don't lie. They don't promise forever and then break your heart. They just respond to care, to patience, to the simple act of showing up. Maybe that's all any of us can do after the ruin. Just keep showing up until the noise fades, the anger quiets, and the silence stops feeling like loss. By dusk, the engine was running again, humming smooth and steady. I wiped my hands on a rag, leaned against the hood, and listened to the sound. It wasn't triumph. It was peace, the kind you don't notice until you've fought for it long enough to recognize it. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. The next morning felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath and was waiting to see what I'd do next. The house still smelled faintly of Kelsey's perfume, something floral and expensive, the kind that lingered long after she left a room. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise and curl into the air, thinking about how many mornings we'd sat in this same spot pretending to be happy, pretending to be normal, pretending to be a family. Now there was no pretending left to do, just choices, consequences, freedom. The doorbell rang just before noon. Pete stood on the porch, holding a brown envelope and wearing that half-skeptical expression he got whenever he thought I was about to do something stupid but admirable. "Papers," he said, handing me the envelope. "Jim sent them over early. Said to sign where marked, initial the bottom." I nodded, took the papers and set them on the counter. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Once it's done, there's no walking it back." I gave a small, tired smile. "Pete, I think the walking back part ended the minute she decided to start lying to me." He grunted. "Fair enough." We went out back, sat on the porch steps like we used to when business was slow and life was simpler. The autumn air had that clean chill to it, the kind that made the world feel sharper. "You know," Pete said, "I keep thinking about what you told Bran yesterday, about being weak but not bad. You ever think that applies to her too?" I looked down at my hands that had built engines, repaired fences, held her when she cried. "Maybe," I said finally. "But weakness only means something if you try to overcome it. She didn't. She hid behind it." Pete nodded slowly. "You're handling this better than I would. I'd be burning down bridges, not signing polite paperwork." I gave a dry chuckle. "Oh, I've thought about it. But what's the point? You can't punish someone into remorse. You just move on and let them live with what they've done." After Pete left, I sat at the table again and finally opened the envelope. The papers were straightforward: division of assets, the house, the business shares, the accounts. I'd told Jim to be fair. I didn't want revenge, just closure. There was a blank space for my signature at the bottom. My hand hovered for a long time before I finally picked up the pen and signed. Just like that, 22 years became a few lines of legal ink. Later that evening, I drove to the shop. The place was quiet, the smell of oil and steel comforting in a way my home no longer was. I turned on the lights, ran my hand across the hood of an old Chevy we'd been restoring for months. Working with my hands always made sense when nothing else did. Machines were honest. You gave them care, they ran. You neglected them, they broke. People were more complicated. They broke even when you did everything right. The bell above the door rang softly, and I looked up to see Bran standing there. His face was still bruised, one eye dark and swollen, but there was something different about him, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I didn't think I'd see you again," I said. "I just wanted to say thank you," he replied. "You didn't have to cover for me. You didn't have to give me that key story." I shrugged. "Maybe I didn't, but I figured you'd already lost enough." He hesitated. "I checked into a motel near the highway, got a lead on a job upstate. It's not glamorous, warehouse work, but it's honest." "That's a start," I said. "Just remember, starting over means more than changing your address." He nodded. "I know. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I'm done lying." I looked at him for a long moment. "Good. Then maybe there's hope for you yet." After he left, I stood alone in the garage for a while, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint ticking of cooling engines. It struck me how endings rarely feel like endings when they happen. They feel like small, quiet moments, like signing a form, like watching someone walk away, like closing a door behind you. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The night was clear, the air crisp. The stars looked sharper than they had in years. When I got home, I poured myself a drink, not to forget, but to mark the moment. I sat by the window, watching headlights pass along the distant road. I thought about Kelsey somewhere out there, maybe sitting in a rented apartment, maybe replaying every word we'd said, maybe realizing too late that I'd stopped chasing her the moment I learned the truth. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Forgiveness wasn't something you gave to make someone else feel better. It was something you earned by facing the wreckage you caused. She wasn't there yet. Maybe she never would be. The clock struck midnight. I raised my glass to the empty room. "To starting over," I whispered. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't bitterness. It was something steadier. Acceptance. The kind that comes when you stop looking backward and finally start walking into the unknown. The kind that means, for the first time in years, I was truly free. The Green Lion was busier than usual for a Tuesday night. Tommy had added a trivia contest that brought in younger crowds, and the place buzzed with competitive energy and friendly arguments about obscure sports statistics. I sat at my usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a beer and watching Pete argue with a table of college kids about whether the 1986 Celtics could beat the current team. Pete was passionate about his basketball, and the kids had no idea what they were getting into. "Another round?" Tommy asked, wiping down the bar in front of me. "Sure." He poured a fresh beer and slid it across the wooden surface. "You're looking good, Mitch. Better than you have in months." He wasn't wrong. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, and I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 6 months and could finally exhale. The settlement had been fair. Kelsey got half of everything, which was what she would have gotten anyway, but she'd had to pay back the $15,000 she'd taken plus interest. Her lawyer had tried to argue that it was marital property used for marital purposes, but Jim had been persuasive about the adultery angle. "How's the business?" Tommy asked. "Booming. Turns out being a free man gives you a lot more energy for work." It was true. Donnelly and Sons had landed 3 major contracts in the past 2 months, including a shopping center renovation that would keep us busy through next year. Without the constant tension at home, I'd been able to focus completely on growing the company. And the house? Sold it last week, closing next Friday. I'd put the house on the market 2 months after Kelsey moved out. Too many memories, too many rooms that felt empty without her presence. I'd bought a smaller place closer to downtown, a renovated warehouse with exposed brick and big windows. It felt more like me somehow. "Where's she living now?" Tommy asked. "Boston. Got a job with a bigger PR firm." I didn't mention that she'd had to take a pay cut because of the scandal that followed our divorce. Word gets around in professional circles, and adultery doesn't look good on a resume. You ever hear from the other guy? Bran? No. Last I heard, he'd moved to California, probably trying to reinvent himself as a tech entrepreneur or something. Actually, I knew exactly where Bran was. Mrs. Hennessy had mentioned seeing him working at a coffee shop in Harvard Square, looking tired and older than his years. The loan sharks had apparently been satisfied with his BMW and whatever cash he could scrape together, but his days of living large were over. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel vindictive either. He'd gotten what he deserved, and now he was trying to build something real for the first time in his life. Maybe he'd succeed, maybe he wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. You dating anyone? Tommy asked. Not yet. Still figuring out who I am as a single man. It was strange, being alone after so many years of marriage. Simple things like grocery shopping or watching TV felt different when you only had to consider your own preferences. I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under decades of compromise and routine. Pete finished destroying the college kids' basketball knowledge and joined me at the bar, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Kids today don't know anything about real basketball, he said, ordering a beer. They think LeBron invented the game. You're getting old, Pete. We're all getting old. Question is whether we're getting wiser. He had a point. 6 months ago, I'd been a married man living a lie, too comfortable and complacent to notice that my wife had checked out of our relationship years before she started cheating. Now I was divorced, living alone, and somehow happier than I'd been in years. Maybe wisdom was just another word for accepting reality instead of fighting it. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Kelsey. She still contacted me occasionally about paperwork or belongings she'd left behind, but the number was unfamiliar. Hi, this is Sarah from the coffee shop on Beacon Street. You left your business card yesterday when you helped me with that broken chair. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. No pressure, just thought it might be nice to talk more. I stared at the message, remembering the woman from yesterday. Mid-30s, brown hair, laugh lines around her eyes that suggested someone who found joy in small things. She'd been struggling with a wobbly chair at her table, and I'd instinctively offered to fix it. Old habits from a lifetime of building and repairing things. We'd talked for maybe 10 minutes while I tightened the screws and adjusted the legs. She was a teacher, recently moved to Boston from Portland, still figuring out the city. She'd seemed genuinely interested when I told her about my construction company, asking smart questions about the business and the challenges of working in an old city like Boston. I'd left my card without really thinking about it, the way contractors do when they meet potential clients. But apparently, she'd seen it as something more personal. Good news? Pete asked, noticing my expression. Maybe. I typed back, I'd like that. When works for you? Her response came quickly. Friday. There's a great Italian place near my apartment. It's a date? Pete raised his beer. To new beginnings. I clinked my bottle against his. To new beginnings. Outside, the city hummed with life. Cars passing, people walking, the endless motion of a place where everyone was trying to get somewhere better. I'd spent so many years focused on what I was losing that I'd forgotten to pay attention to what I might gain. Kelsey had texted me last week. I hope you know I never meant to hurt you. I hope you can find happiness. I'd thought about responding, maybe telling her that I'd already found it. But some conversations are better left unfinished. Some chapters need to end without epilogues or explanations. Instead, I'd deleted the message and gone back to planning my new life. The trivia contest was winding down, and the bar was starting to empty. Pete headed home to his wife and kids, and Tommy began the nightly ritual of cleaning glasses and counting register receipts. I finished my beer and left money on the bar, including a generous tip. Tommy had been more than a bartender during the worst months of my life. He'd been a friend, a confidant, and sometimes a therapist. He'd earned every dollar. See you tomorrow? He asked. Probably not. I've got a date Friday night and I should probably figure out how to be good company again. Tommy grinned. You'll do fine. Just be yourself. That's what I'm afraid of. Don't be. Yourself is a pretty decent guy. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in months. The city stretched out around me, full of possibilities I'd never considered when I was married and settled and convinced that my life was already written. Maybe Kelsey had been right about one thing. Maybe I had been taking her for granted, getting too comfortable with routine and predictability. But instead of cheating and lying and stealing, I'd chosen to start over honestly. It was messier this way, lonelier sometimes, but it was real. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Looking forward to Friday. Fair warning, I'm terrible at small talk, but I make excellent conversation about books, movies, and why pineapple belongs on pizza. I laughed out loud, startling a couple walking past on the sidewalk. Me too, I typed back. On all counts. As I walked to my truck, I thought about the text that had started everything 6 months ago. Skipping dinner tonight. Time for me. Hope you get it. I'd gotten it all right. I'd gotten it completely. And now it was time for me to get something better. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.